knew? For me, it was during the tedium of a 1986 summer job in the Paris suburb of Boulogne-Billancourt as I punched citizens' names into the city school board's first ever computer network. Who knew that a lowly data entry gig made me an unwitting foot soldier in the transformation of capitalism and perhaps humanity? From two fingers on a keyboard, fast forward to the present in the age of terabytes and artificial intelligence. It's France and India, a co-host an AI summit in Paris. We ask if it's spun so far beyond our control that any well-intentioned bid by world leaders to forge common rules and guidelines seems, well, too little too late. Right now, it's Silicon Valley that's got the money to draw the best and the brightest and the cheap energy to power the bigger and bigger data centers needed for AI. Add to that a new US administration that's ready to start a trade war with all those in its path. And how does the rest of the world defend privacy, shared natural resources, including strategic minerals in places like China and Africa? And what to do about a digital age that so far seems to concentrate so much power and wealth into the hands of so few? More broadly, is the technology evolving faster than humanity can process its potentials and its dangers? We'll be asking our panel today in the France 24 debate the global challenges of artificial intelligence. And joining us from the AI Action Summit, the host of our Tech 24 program, Peter O'Brien. It's day one. Thanks for being with us.
You're welcome.
He's a mathematician by training who's advised President Macron. Thierry Coulon is president of the Polytechnique Institute of Paris. You hosted the, I guess you could call it the pre-summit last week, which brought together some heavy thinkers already. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Bangladeshi-American data scientist Ruman Chowdhury is the CEO and co-founder of Humane Intelligence. Tell us what Humane Intelligence is.
We are a tech nonprofit that's building the community of practice to understand the impact of AI on society.
All right, thanks for joining us. Thanks as well to a man who's been covering AI for Fortune magazine since, well, before it became a thing. Jeremy Kahn, the author of Mastering AI, a survival guide to our super-powered future. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
By the way, you can listen, like, and subscribe to the France 24 debate wherever podcasts are streamed. Ruman, what does AI mean for you?
Well, artificial intelligence has been compared to many things, electricity, oil, so many things. I think just for the average person, artificial intelligence represents the next wave of technological evolution, things that will impact every aspect of our lives. And in fact, AI is really used in many things today. We just don't see it. So for the regular person, AI may change how you live, work, and play.
How you live, work, and play. So it changes us as humans?
I don't know if it changes us as humans. I actually think the human condition has been actually fairly universal across time. This is why Shakespeare holds so much meaning for us, even though here we are in a fancy studio with electricity, and that's something unfathomable in this time. I don't think it changes humans at all.
All right, doesn't change humans, but there are these concerns and this worry that Thierry Coulon, that and a lot of the talk over, and there's been plenty of media coverage in this country over the last 72 hours ahead of this summit.
Yep.
A lot of the talk has been explaining what artificial intelligence is, and should we be reassuring people or should they worry?
Well, first we've got to understand things before we worry or we are too optimistic. So the people at Institut Polytechnique de Paris, they are part of the people who did artificial intelligence. The Institut Polytechnique de Paris is made of 6 engineering schools that started, some of them in the 18th century, some of them in the 20th century. We are trying to turn them into a single institution adapted, relevant for the 21st century. But what they have always done is to keep pace with the scientific revolutions and to anticipate them. So we are strong in math and stats and computer science. So that's what we are training students to do. And I think we can be adapted to these exciting times.
You're figuring out the how, but do you think about the why?
Yes, indeed, because there are social impacts, indeed, and we also have social scientists. I guess it's too early to say, but it's not too early to think about the potential consequences and the way we can regulate things.
Jeremy Kahn, we heard the French president who invited disruption in the speech he gave a short while ago. Yeah. Disruptions become something of a dirty word for some when they look at this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think people are worried about what this technology is going to do to society, to their jobs. People are very concerned about the potential impacts of this. It is, and I think it is right to say it's a disruptive technology. I think it will change many things and be fairly transformative. I think there'll be some very good changes, and I think there are some risks that we should be mindful of and try to take action now to potentially avoid or mitigate.
All right. It already feels that the information age has begot the disinformation age. A lot of the focus has been on this aspect of it among the general public that doesn't see what Ruman was telling you about, which is the applications that go beyond asking ChatGPT about a specific topic. Eliza Herbert has that story.
Joe Biden and Donald Trump closer than ever, or Emmanuel Macron embracing Marine Le Pen. As deepfakes grow more and more prolific, so do the abuses of artificial intelligence. In just a few clicks, an image can be falsified and virally spread across the internet. Chatbots, too, are adding to disinformation. According to experts, programs that impersonate real people can be a dangerous digital tool, especially when generating myths or rumours around election campaigns.
No, important questions that we should tackle. The future of the workforce, of course, the impact on our society, on our democracies.
Automation threatens to replace jobs like customer service, retail, and many other professions. Generative AI can clone voices used in impersonation scams, and services such as ChatGPT, capable of producing text, image, and sounds, directly endanger artists' livelihoods, copyright, and the collective imagination.
How can we fail to see that this is the Trojan horse for giving up the use of our most fundamental faculties?
Another issue is on the battlefield. Militaries already use AI in warfare for mass surveillance and with autonomous drones. And recently, Google dropped its ban on using AI to develop weapons.
It could also be used in much more dangerous and harmful ways. For example, kill anyone who fits the following description.
Bias and discrimination, privacy and data leaks, and the environmental cost of the heavily energy-dependent services are a few more of the risks that come with AI.
Yeah, I guess, Peter O'Brien, we could have entitled this show, What Could Possibly Go Wrong? I suppose these kinds of worst-case scenarios spelled out there, that's not what we heard from the French president earlier, but it's high on everybody's mind.
Yeah, and I think one thing that went a little bit under the radar was that quick fire round that he did in his interview on Sunday night, where he was asked the question, is AI a threat to our democracies? And he hesitated, and he finally did answer yes. In fact, I read that speech he made on Sunday night as a classic Macron en même temps, right? He's supporting the AI Act. He actually even called for global regulation of AI. But at the same time, clearly it was a massive effort to drum up investment, and that's absolutely absorbed this entire first day of the summit. This headline that he's drummed up, 109 billion euros, it is actually on a similar level to the kind of promise that we saw from Stargate in the US. But some definitely that I've spoken to at the summit feel like the other concerns around safety, around risk, have been sidelined while Macron kind of rolls back the ears and plays the best hits of the startup nation.
Yeah, let me bring in Ruman on this. There are mixed messages, and we heard him earlier from the French president. On the one hand, he's saying, day two, we're going to talk about regulation. But it's day one. Come invest in France. Come invest in Europe.
Right. And we're seeing that shift actually across the board. Even a lot of the people who called for safety and were concerned about existential risk today are saying we should innovate. I think there's two things being reflected here. First is there's immense commercial opportunity, and there's a lot of pressure from big and powerful companies for these governments, to be aligned with them. On the other end, I do think one of the reasons we don't talk about AI abolition is that even for those of us who work on societal impact, we do want to see a better vision where artificial intelligence is used to improve humans' lives.
Want to see how it's improved the lives of humans. We're at the same time worried about who has control. And we heard this from the French president in that Sunday night speech that he gave to French television and to journalists who had come from India. Emmanuel Macron talking about the dangers that lie ahead, and talking about the United States in particular, raising concerns, he says, with its tech dominance.
It affects everyone's life, yet it's controlled by only a few. And that's where the problem begins, when tools that billions rely on to learn, work, treat others, and shape their lives on the hands of a small group, mostly private interests, without a global conversation about what's right, where the limits should be, and how to ensure access for all, then we're not doing our job properly.
Now, Peter O'Brien, the French president there, doesn't say the words the United States, but it's implicit.
Everyone is looking forward, with trepidation, I have to say, a lot of people here in Europe, for J.D. Vance's speech tomorrow. If anyone tells you they know what he's going to say, then don't bank on it. We know he's from Silicon Valley. We know he's criticized the EU a lot in the past for over-regulating, but that tends to be about what he calls free speech concerns. His speech comes slap bang in the middle of Emmanuel Macron's tomorrow morning and Ursula von der Leyen's. So that's, if I can put it this way, sort of unusual bedfellows. But the truth is that America is a huge concern for a lot of people working in AI regulation, because he has ripped up Joe Biden's executive order putting safety guardrails around AI. He's fired the head of the US's AI Safety Institute. France, meanwhile, has just started its own AI Safety Institute. That's one of the things to come out of the summit. But it's looking increasingly like it's the US against the world in AI as well as many other things.
In many other things, and you spoke with the Vice President of the European Commission on this.
Yeah, that's right. She's here at this event at the Maison de la Chimie, which is we trudged through a muddy construction site from the Grand Palais to get here and interview her. And first off, I asked her, is this event actually been a little bit too much about investment and a bit too much about the French?
Of course, we have one common single market in the European Union, so we want to make sure that we have also that kind of framework in the European Union that encourages investments and innovations when it comes to AI.
You know what J.D. Vance's comments are like on the EU. Is he going to come in and throw a grenade tomorrow in all of this?
Of course, all the countries, they have their own rules when it comes, for example, the digital sector and the other sectors. And in the European Union, we are very committed to our rules. We want to make sure that we have fair and safe and also democratic environment when it comes to digitalization.
Was Italy right to take action against DeepSeek?
All the companies who are doing business and operating in the European Union, of course, have to respect our digital rules, and it also comes to data protection. So that is now something that is national authorities are doing and checking it, for example, with DeepSeek.
Is it not problematic that we're getting very different approaches from different data protection authorities within the EU?
When we look at our digital rules, it would be better if we have always one approach in the European level, and we know that with the GDPR we have different ways of implementation in different member states, and of course it's never good if we have that kind of fragmentation in our markets.
That's the EU's tech boss saying there that actually the EU needs to take a common approach for AI, worried about things splintering apart further.
Yeah, GDPR, she mentions there, just to tell our viewers, that's part of the rules for tech transparency put forth by Brussels that U.S. tech companies have to abide by. And as Peter O'Brien was saying, might be in the crosshairs of that speech we hear from J.D. Vance. Your thoughts on the U.S. Vice President at this summit and what you're expecting from him?
You know, I'm a mere citizen, and as a citizen, I just think that Europe might find the proper balance between innovation and regulation. We have a model where the citizen is protected, and we want to innovate.
Yeah, because we don't want to be the referee in a football match between China and the United States.
That's right. That's right. And the only way to do this is to be an actor, and we are. For once, we did not miss the train. I mean, we, France and Europe, we are in the train. I mean, there is a lot of uncertainty. Who knows what will happen, but we are players. And I would like to advocate for two things we higher education institutions can do. First, education. I mean, we have to train people to AI. We have to train them to be critical and aware, and that will help. And the second thing is, let us speak a little bit of the potential upsides of AI and the potential positive consequences. Every scientific presentation I hear these days, whether in biology, chemistry, physics, uses AI with a power that is incredible. So as far as you have to test molecules and to test proteins and so on and so forth, I mean, you are going to the very scientific methods are changing for the better. And well, that's worth it, isn't it, when we speak of diagnosis of cancer?
Jeremy Kahn, you heard there Thierry Coulon alluding to the fact that France has its own AI champion. It's a company's, one of its co-founders, an alum of
two of them,
right. Excuse me, of Polytechnique, and it's called Mistral. And your thoughts?
I mean, Mistral's it's a good company. They're good founders, and they've put out some good models. I think the issue has been a question of scale. The model sizes that they have put out are not as big as what you've seen from sort of OpenAI or Anthropic. And I think there's this issue of what is it going to take to sort of get to the next level of capabilities. For a while, it looked like to get to the next level, it was going to take these massive data centers, which is why OpenAI has done this partnership to build Stargate. It's not clear. It wasn't clear that Mistral would have that kind of capital to build something that big. Now there's some debate in the field, actually, about whether that's really necessary. There are these models that are coming out now that are smaller, that do very well. DeepSeek is a smaller model.
This is China's version.
This is China's, this model from a Chinese startup. It's a very innovative model in a lot of ways. One of the things that's innovative about it is they showed that you could take a smaller model and get it to do these kind of reasoning steps that are very similar to these very big models. And so that's interesting, and it's possible that Mistral could borrow some of those innovations from DeepSeek. The whole world sort of is studying this model. It's an open source model, meaning anyone can download it, anyone can examine it. They publish quite a lot of information about how they engineered it, and the whole world can kind of learn from that. And I'm sure the guys at Mistral are looking at that and thinking, are there things here that we can borrow?
So if something like DeepSeek is open source, does it need to be banned? Emmanuel Macron says he's against that for now. You heard the hesitation there in that clip that Peter O'Brien played us of the tech czar at the European Commission.
Yeah, well, the model itself, you can take the entire model and run it on your own equipment, and then there's very little risk to privacy or security. The issue has been if DeepSeek also offers the chance to interact with the model through their own servers, so then you are talking to a system in China. And there has been concern about what is happening with that data, and does the Chinese government potentially have potential to access that data? And there's some relationship in that service with China Telecom, which DeepSeek has not, was very quiet about. That seems that there is perhaps some relationship there. So there are concerns if you're using the app that you would download on your phone, then you're talking to a server in China. There's some concern. But if a company wants to take the model and run it on their own equipment, there's much less concern.
Ruman Chowdhury, what's your religion when it comes to these the nationality of these large language models?
Right. Well, first, in talking about open source, look, open source is not new. It was not invented with AI. Open source has existed for decades and actually has been net good for competition. We have to ask ourselves, in a market that, like AI, that is almost naturally a monopoly or an oligopoly because it is so capital intensive to build models, don't we want to also spur innovation by allowing smaller actors to thrive? As Jeremy's pointed out, DeepSeek and even Meta's Llama models allow you to download and utilize these models for yourselves, or even to make a little startup. So I think we have to look at the actors who are saying open source is bad and how they might benefit from it. What we want is a competitive market.
Because right now the concern more broadly, just going beyond artificial intelligence, is the most powerful control the secret sauce, whether that's algorithms or whether it's the model for making artificial intelligence.
That's right. So my nonprofit, Humane Intelligence, we work on test and evaluation. We've pioneered things like public red teaming. It's where you bring in people to evaluate models. Now, unfortunately, that can only go so far because today the model owners write their own homework, they grade their own tests, and then they publish their own findings, telling the world about how great their models perform. Even when you think about all of the news and the hype around DeepSeek versus OpenAI, what you have to look at are the metrics by which they analyze performance. Now it's things like medical exams, legal exams, physics questions, and coding questions. Very little of those questions were about impact on society. Might it perpetuate discrimination? Does it hold up against cybersecurity standards? So as long as we let companies write their own tests and grade their own homework, we're really not understanding what's happening.
So whose job is it to enforce accountability?
I think it's an ecosystem. I think government plays a role, but as we've talked about the United States, that can also sometimes be questionable.
And that's over for 4 years, at least.
Well, to be determined, but I think your prediction's probably correct. This is also why we need a robust civil society, technical organizations, and also I'm a big proponent of independent algorithmic auditors. One of the things that I and others are pushing for in the United States is something called safe harbor. It exists for ethical hackers as it relates to software, and I think it needs to exist for people who want to understand the impact of algorithms and not be sued by companies.
Can they do that? Can they take on Silicon Valley?
We can try.
Your thoughts on this, Jeremy?
Yeah, I think that it's going to be difficult with the current administration to see the U.S. government doing something on the federal level anytime soon. But there are states in the U.S. that are trying on their own to pass rules, including some states with quite a lot of power. There was a bill in California that got to the governor's desk. It was ultimately vetoed, but there's going to be a sort of second attempt or third attempt in California to pass legislation. There's some legislation in Colorado, and those things can actually have an impact. And the companies don't love it because they'd rather see one national rule that makes it much easier for them to comply to. But these state efforts can actually have impact. We've seen that with privacy. The state of Illinois has a very strong data privacy and biometric privacy law. It's a state law, but it's had national impact. And so you might see those kind of efforts actually creating some accountability for these companies.
These kind of civil society approach, that's anathema to what France is all about. We're a very top-down country.
That's right. Nevertheless, we try to cure ourselves. And, and I like the idea that maybe we are not going to a super intelligence ruled by somebody, but to a network of intelligences that would interact between themselves and that could be controlled or we could be critical about them. I also love the idea of open source. Yesterday I was at a meeting of so-called AI Alliance. And when you see that IBM and Meta are in favor of open source because they have understood that it helps competition, well, that's good news.
Yeah, we're actually a member of AI Alliance as well.
Yes.
So there is this other issue, which is we don't yet know how much energy all of this computing is going to require. Emmanuel Macron talking up that big investment that Peter O'Brien was telling us about. And more and more, let's take the example of the United States. It's contemplating the opening of its first nuclear power plants in decades. Studies predict they'll consume up to 9% artificial intelligence will consume up to 9% of the country's energy by 2030. Here in Europe, data centers already consume a whopping 3% of electricity, and that could climb to 8% by 2030, Peter O'Brien. That's the equivalent of the whole electricity output of a country like Spain. Of course, a lot could happen between then, but still, this requires a lot of energy, and a lot of the protesters are about that.
Yeah, so there's a few things here. One is that the kind of efficiency saving we saw with DeepSeek might show that it doesn't have to be an exponential increase in energy usage. Another thing is, you're totally correct, depending on the country, there will be a different environmental impact. I think one of the main reasons that Macron has drummed up this support for France is because of its abundant nuclear power. Because a lot of companies don't want to be seen to be pushing out loads more CO2 in the atmosphere. So if these kind of data centers are set up in other countries that are more reliant on hydrocarbons, there might be a lot more emissions. In fact, I was talking to Stuart Russell, who is a scientist at Berkeley. He's literally written the book on AI, the AI textbook, which is in more than 1,500 universities around the world. He's got an interesting take on this. He says, look at the statistics we currently have. At its current rate, we can't, and this, is far from the consensus that we've seen emerging in some of the media and a lot of the people talking about AI. He says that at the moment, it is a tiny fraction of the world's carbon emissions, AI data centers. But he's someone who believes in AI potentially having an exponential increase in terms of its resource use. So he said in that case, if it does continue on an exponential path, then we do need to start to worry. But as I said earlier, DeepSeek is potentially a bit of a counterexample as to somewhere where efficiencies can be made.
Yeah, because the planet's resources, Raman Chowdhury, are finite.
And I'll also add that DeepSeek is built on reusing essentially a fundamentally, bigger trained model. So DeepSeek is able to be efficient because existing foundation models exist. So we couldn't have one without the other. I am not a climate and AI expert. However, I channel my friend, Dr. Sasha Lucioni, climate lead at Hugging Face, and she's been doing amazing work on things like Energy Star ratings for AI models. And it's also important to differentiate what we mean. There's a difference between the cost of energy in training a model, which is quite high, versus, and that's a sunk cost, versus performing an individual task, asking ChatGPT 10 questions, right? If ChatGPT has already been built and then we're distilling models on top of it, that's what the process for DeepSeek is called, distillation. Is that cheaper, easier, and better? But I don't think it gets rid of the question of what's the climate impact of AI models. Just because it's less than what we use today, we know the planet is burning. We know that the environment is declining.
Right. We know the environment is declining, and like you're saying, these large language models are riding piggyback. And now we have this ambition, right? The Indians have been talking up the fact that they want their large language models to be not just in English, but also in all the languages of their country. That too is going to cost money.
Absolutely, and I believe India's launched a competition for homegrown foundation models, and my understanding is that the government is hosting this competition to spark their startup ecosystem in what's called sovereign AI. It's a phrase I heard quite a bit in my international travels as U.S. science envoy in the Biden administration, science envoy for AI. Sovereign AI is a big topic of conversation. People want their own homegrown models for things like data protection, privacy, security, but also cultural context, linguistic completeness. What people don't want is sort of a cultural encroachment and values that are different from theirs.
Yeah, because already capitalism has killed a lot of languages. People in France, for instance, don't speak with regional accents as much anymore, speak local dialects because they all watch the same 8 o'clock news when I was growing up. Now, with artificial intelligence, does that accelerate that homogenization of culture?
That's definitely a risk. And if we don't do things like building sovereign models or more local models, it's definitely a risk that you could get more homogenization. that is something I think people need to be aware of. On the other hand, whether it really makes sense for everyone to train their own large model in every case, I'm not sure it does. I'm not sure it's the most sort of, we're talking about environmentally sustainable paths. It's not clear that would be necessarily the most environmentally sustainable path either. But I think there's ways to sort of use these models where you could counteract some of those trends. The models actually have a fair bit of knowledge. They sort of suck up the world's internet worth of data, and within that, you can sometimes take a model and fine tune it to perform fairly well at a local task or a local language. It's much harder for languages that are not digitized in any way, so-called low-resource languages. There, it's a much bigger problem because there just isn't digital data on those languages. And there you might have to do things, but there's some ways AI can even help there. So you could do, for instance, AI is very good at taking voice to text. So one idea is if you can create some kind of chatbot or voice interface for people in low-resource countries, you actually have a way of digitizing their data. You can actually get them to tell sort of their traditional stories to something that then can take that and create digital documents, digital artifacts that can then be used to train a model. But right now, we don't have the data for some of these low-resource languages to train effective models.
Thierry Coulon, is that something that...
Yes, indeed. We did not mention so far very much the issue of data. To have a good artificial intelligence, what do we need? We need computing power. We need talents, qualified personnel. We need a business model. But we also need clean data and interesting data. And that's why, imagine all the libraries are connected, all the incredible works of art or literature of every country is treated by AI. That would be fantastic. And indeed, you have to collect data in some parts of the world where no digitalization has taken place.
Fantastic, or is it theft? Because a lot of these large language models rely on taking everybody's personal data.
Yes, that's what's extremely interesting in the current times. What should be open? What should be proprietary? Where is privacy? I mean, that's...
In his speech, Peter O'Brien, in his speech, Emmanuel Macron talked about copyright. But what was he meaning by that?
Copyright is one of the issues that's among the most thorny, because one of the outcomes we have from the summit is a copyright charter that's been signed by a lot of publishers and a lot of sort of artists representatives, writers representatives, musicians representatives around the world. So a lot of them have signed this charter calling for protections of copyright. And there's a couple of things in here. It's not just about how we make sure people are fairly compensated for their work essentially being data mined, but also what happens to stuff that's generated by AI. Is that then under copyright? Does it fall under the copyright of the person who produced the work? So in terms of the outcomes of this summit, it's notable that none of the AI companies are signatories of this charter. So that's not going to be enough to get them to change if, for instance, they have stolen data. We saw actually last week the US Copyright Office released its kind of opinion, if you like, on the latter point, whether stuff produced by AI falls under copyright. And they essentially said, in the vast majority of cases, no, it doesn't, because it's been produced by an AI, therefore it shouldn't come under copyright. And they said, actually, for now, copyright law is strong enough on its own to be able to deal with a lot of the questions around AI and copyright. But that still leaves a massive question over the enforcement, because there's a lot of work out there that has, it appears to have been taken without permission, and I know it's a huge question of, can this ever be compensated? Because at the moment we've now got publishing houses, for instance, that are signing deals. We saw recently AFP here in Paris sign a deal with Mistral, giving them access to all of their journalists' work in return for some sort of gain from Mistral. But the question is whether this is enough and whether it will be. I know there's definitely a lot of smaller artists or writers that aren't necessarily represented by big houses like AFP that have a very different perspective on it.
Yeah, AFP, the French news agency. Ruman Chowdhury, as we saw those images of leaders beginning to arrive for that dinner hosted at the French presidential palace for those attending the AI summit. This question of who owns the internet and who owns what's in it.
I think the internet has undergone, frankly, sad change. The internet started off as a place of openness. It was free for anybody. And yes, we needed to protect people on the internet, but increasingly it's become a privatized and monetized space. And what suffers is the quality of what's on there. You had mentioned earlier about the quality of data that goes in data sets. Now, if you think about AFP or The Atlantic or all these places just handing over their data sets to big companies, the people who suffer the most are actually the people who have written the articles, the journalists, who are not being adequately compensated, because one of the questions is, what does adequate compensation even look like, right? What does it mean to have a revenue model? But it is also self-defeating, because no AI can ever write as well as a journalist. Like Jeremy wrote a book recently, and no AI could write that book, and it's built on his years of experience. And an AI could mimic Jeremy if you wanted it to, but it's not going to get that native knowledge. And one of the things people talk about is something called model collapse, where models are increasingly trained on data made by AI. And it's almost like an inbreeding that leads to, and if you think about animals, if you inbreed too much, then it has these fundamental genetic flaws. And the same thing happens to AI models. You cannot simply keep training a model on its own data, because after a while it removes itself from reality. So you'll forever need this, genuine source of information. Well, if we're making an exploitative system where we are simply, the producers, but not the receivers of the benefits, that is, not a system that's sustainable.
Jeremy, are you reassured there that no matter come hell or high water, you'll always need a good copy editor?
Yeah, well, that's a
human being.
Well, copy editors is an interesting one, because that's one where maybe the systems are good enough now to do some of that. But no, I'm assured that Ruman thinks that AI can't write as well as I can. That's also, people always ask me on the book, did I use AI to write it? And I did not, because and they said, well, did you try? And I did actually spend a little bit of time. Could I get this thing to write as well as I could? I could not. I could not prompt it to, and I tried to give it some samples of my writing. I could not get it to write as well as I could. But I'm not sure that's going to be true forever, actually, to be fair. But what I do think is going to be true is that you're still going to need journalists. And you're going to need journalists to find facts, and particularly to go out and investigate and to hold public figures to account, and to go out and find new facts that are not already in the public domain. That will remain, and maybe even become an even more important sort of skill going forward. Whether the actual composition of the product is done by the human sitting at a keyboard writing, or whether it's sort of synthesized by and created by AI, I'm not sure. But the actual fact-finding very much will still have to be done by journalists. And then when I think it comes to sort of the writing of works of fiction, of novels and things, those are a form of art. And I think art is ultimately about the communication from one person to another. It's about actually the intention of the artist. And these AI systems have no intention. They're not people. They have no lived experience, which they're trying to convey. So I think ultimately there's going to be something inauthentic always about a novel written by AI, and I hope people recognize that inauthenticity and prefer actually the authentic communication you get between artist and human audience.
We talk about the beauty of mathematics. You're a mathematician, Thierry Coulon. So, but at the end of the day, when it comes to things that are more of a technical ilk, the machines can take over.
Well, as far as math are concerned, I don't know. Terry Tao, who is probably the best living mathematician, said a few months ago that he used AI as an undergrad, moderately gifted undergrad student. I don't know whether it's still true or not.
You remember when we used to say that about about chess?
Yes.
The machines that
That's
couldn't
why
be...
we should. Nevertheless, as Yann Lequin says, AI does not understand the way the world works. I mean, how reality works. So I do think that at least for some time, the efficient combination will be the combination of human intelligence and artificial intelligence. I mean, again, as far as diagnosis is concerned, that's obvious that you need specialists to properly interpret the thousands of images that have been sorted out by artificial intelligence. So, well, let's work with that. Let's try to be assisted by artificial intelligence to go further, probably not to be replaced.
And what about winners and losers? Because the French saying, and you heard the French president saying,
yeah,
come invest with us. We got nuclear energy. We have lots of land, and we have smart people who go to Polytechnique. But,
and data, because we are a centralized state. So,
right.
Yes.
Not all EU members are so well endowed. So are there going to be winners and losers now?
Well, I guess at least in Europe, I mean, as far as higher education institutions are concerned, the field I know best, we try to collaborate. And I mean, we are in an alliance with the TUM, with Technion and EPFL, so that's Europe in a broad sense, with the Danish and the Netherlands. And we tackle the same big challenges: AI, climate, defense and security. So, yeah, there is a European game where there should be winners and few losers.
Very, very briefly there, Peter O'Brien. Can we say this day one is the easy part?
I don't know if Macron would say it's been easy, because he's obviously working on a lot of these contracts for many years. And tomorrow, I mean, yes, I think so, because it is really the politics of it that are going to be difficult. Macron's clearly said he's in favour of a global regulation of sorts. And what I think is interesting is China. We haven't talked about China, but in the last 6 months, they really have moved towards more of a concern on AI risk and safety. In a way, perhaps, as the French have got less interested in that. But China will be present. The Vice Premier will be there tomorrow. And it seems, at least on some topics, they'll want to collaborate. But I do think, even, I've seen some people say the wording that France has gone for seems like almost like a bit of a middle finger to the US in some ways, because talking about things like inclusivity and sustainability are not what the US wants to hear.
All right, and we'll be, of course, covering it for you right here on France 24. Peter O'Brien, many thanks for joining us live there. I want to thank Thierry Coulon, Ruman Chowdhury, Jeremy Khan. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.